Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Chitheads. My guest today is T.S. Little. T.S. is committed to teaching yoga as a contemplative path, leading to greater sensitivity, tolerance, and deeper understanding. His approach to the practice is interdisciplinary, passionate, intelligent, innovative, and full of insight. T.S. synthesizes years of study in classical yoga, Sanskrit, Buddhist studies, anatomy, massage, and trauma healing. T.S. began studying the work of B.K.S Iyengar in 1984 and lived in Mysore, India in 1989, studying Ashtanga Vinyasa Yoga with Pattabhi Jois. T.S. is a licensed massage therapist, and his somatic studies include in-depth training in craniosacral therapy. His practice and teaching is influenced by the work of Ida Rolf, Feldenkrais, and Thomas Hanna. T.S. is a longtime student of the meditative arts and Buddhist studies, beginning with Vipassana and continuing in Tibetan Buddhism and Zen. He earned a master's degree in Eastern philosophy from St. John's College in Santa Fe, New Mexico in 1998. T.S. also lives in Santa Fe, where he directs his school Prajna Yoga with his wife Surya, and is the author of 3 books, The Thread of Breath, Meditations on a Dewdrop, and Yoga of the Subtle Body. In addition to leading yoga workshops and teacher trainings throughout the US and around the world, T.S. currently offers online classes through Yoga Glow. So hello, T.S. Thanks so much for joining me.
Hi, Jacob. It's a joy to be with you.
It's a real pleasure to get an opportunity to chat with you. You are honestly one of my favorite yoga teachers, so it's always a pleasure and often a battle with a little bit of anxiety and starstruckness. So hopefully it won't come off too much. But so to start off, I'd love to hear a little bit about your story. And we've heard a little bit about your story in the bio here, but I'd love to hear from your perspective, how you came to yoga and really what were sort of the significant moments for you along that trajectory.
Well, let's see. Yeah, I've been practicing yoga since the 16th century, starting in North India. And, I've come to this practice, I think just really through, this kind of great passion to resolve the fundamental split, this split inside of myself that I felt, just really acutely as an adolescent and in my college years and worked through a lot of pain in my own subtle body and my heart pain and so, I think the aim of yoga is to work with this fundamental split. Yoga is about healing the split. And my mother was a counselor, so I kind of come through her background, and also, I started in the Iyengar training initially, but then I'm a really interdisciplinary guy. I like to bring a lot of different threads and tie them onto my spool. Some of the Taoist practices or Zen practices and Buddhist training and somatic understanding. Yeah.
That's excellent. So, it's interesting that you remarked on, healing the split, which I think is sort of a good point to kind of segue into our discussion of the subtle body, since a lot of this splitting manifests in experiences of the subtle body. And you wrote this beautiful book, Yoga of the Subtle Body, which I thought was particularly interesting because, it really did do a very good job at integrating your very precise and deep knowledge of anatomy and the wisdom of the subtle body, and also engaging in the beautiful kind of poetic metaphoric language that you're very skilled at, and that's those are really 2 interesting worlds to straddle. It's like you're healing the split of this sort of Western linear approach with this sort of like wise holistic approach. So even in that text itself, it's sort of like an exercise in this bridging the split or bridging the divide, as you were mentioning. And so I'm curious to hear maybe a little bit about your thoughts on, we often see Western anatomy invoked in a way that doesn't jive with subtle body, and oftentimes those who are interested in anatomy are sort of speak poorly of the subtle body, or think it's sort of a backwards modality because it doesn't remark on anything physical in that sort of traditional sense. So just your reflections on, the apparent separation or the apparent difference of these two traditions, and how you see them as being complementary.
Well, I think that the ancient seers, seers, the rishis that really, downloaded the Vedas through divine inspiration, they were really able to tap into, the internal states of awareness through meditation, obviously, and through prayer, and through, watching lightning flash in the sky, and through a summer cloud, and so really, I think these that yoga kind of comes out of these inner visions, and so I think the more that today that we can work with our inner, or our inner perceptions, our inner capacity to see, the more we practice yoga. And so, the word interoception is used in some of the terminology in the counseling world, or the world of neuroscience today, that capacity to perceive inwardly what's happening. And in the history of, tantra, or whether it's Buddhist tantra or yoga tantra, would imagine a demon, or imagine a bird, or imagine a cloud, and so through the imaginary realm, what's called the Sambhogakaya in the Mahayana teachings, this kind of dreamlike world, we can really begin to work in the subtle body. That is, how thoughts affect feelings, and how states of consciousness affect our glandular secretions and our respiratory rhythms. And so just, riding the subway, or riding on the elevator, or being in conversation with your spouse in the kitchen before a dinner, can really trigger all kinds of, just really a myriad number of feelings inside. So, my process, my yoga now is a kind of attunement to that inner realm of sense and feeling, and then the ancients sort of mapped it out with these elaborate, charts, a little bit like the inside of your cell phone, that has all this circuitry and panels, and conduits, that really the map of the chakras, or the map of the vayus, or the koshas, these various subtle energies were mapped out. And so it's really interesting to me to compare and contrast some of these ancient blueprints, these ancient circuit boards that were mapped out going back 500 to 800, 900 years ago, with what we know today in contemporary research on neuroscience, and the hormonal system, and this kind of thing. Yeah.
Yeah, it's I mean, what I like about it is that you don't seem to, that it's not about reducing one or the one to the other. It's not about reducing the subtle body to anatomy, or reducing anatomy to the subtle body, but really illustrating the ways in which they enrich each other. Do you want to maybe take us on, a short journey, an abridged journey up the chakras, and sort of touching on maybe a little bit of the subtle, and how the subtle meets the anatomical, sort of, and I know that we could go on for hours on this topic, but maybe just a shorter, abridged version.
Yeah, sure. I mean, maybe kind of parallel to the chakras is in the subtle body map. There's the muscular skeletal system. So a lot of people do yoga from the muscular skeletal system. That is, they're doing warrior one, and they're lunging forward and stepping back and lowering down into, the chaturanga, the push-up position. And it's very, muscular, and then the next, after doing that for 10 years and surviving it without, tweaking a shoulder or throwing a sacrum out, then the next, kind of strata or layer of practice, at least in my experience, is then working kind of, in the prana, of course, or the
Mm-hmm.
breathing. And then there's the viscera, of like, gee, how does my practice support my kidneys and my, liver and my bloodstream? And then there's the layer of the glands, that is, our hormonal system governed by the adrenals, and the master glands in the neck and the head, the thyroid, pituitary, that govern metabolic function,
Mm.
which govern, how fast we hum and how much life force we have. And so then there's this kind of way we started tuning to our interior. And then it goes further into kind of a spinal shaft awareness, where over time, primarily, of course, through sitting practice, that we start to attune to spinal rhythms and the pulsatory rhythms in our spinal cord and brainstem, and the hemispheres of the brain itself. And so that's kind of like, this apple, where we start on the skin and the outer shiny layer, and then we go through the flesh and in towards the center of the apple, and where the seeds are, and the kind of the wisdom lies, in the hatha yoga. The wisdom seeds are planted in deep in the interior. So that's maybe kind of a simple rendering of this movement into the subtle body. But for instance, my own practice now, I don't crank myself as I used to. Kind of before I knew better, it was like, it was a very calisthenic yoga that I did, and it
Yeah.
was, the edge had to be extreme. And now the edge that I ride can be as light as a dragonfly wing, or as subtle as, as just the slightest of breezes. And so really the edge can be anywhere, when I'm doing a posture, or I'm certainly in a sitting meditation. And so, but I didn't understand that in the beginning. I thought that more was better, and there was a kind of urgency I felt to have to, to push further and farther. And when that dropped away for me, when I kind of reconciled my pusher, that's when my whole subtle body just really, there's just acres and acres opened up to me. Um,
Mm.
uh, and it was a beautiful transition in my own personal practice.
So I really like the way you expressed, when I invited you to reflect on this sort of path towards subtler layers. It was sort of the way you described it was a path from the gross to the subtle, exterior to interior. And I think, a lot of people, when they discuss the subtle body, it's usually around this kind of traditional path of the kundalini at the base of the spine, rising up the channels and breaking the obstructions of karma along the way. So what is that? Do you see the subtle body in that traditional way as well, as sort of an ascending energy, or do you see it a little bit differently? And then how does that relate then to this kind of like from gross to subtle, exterior to internal layers kind of topology?
Well, that's a good question. I mean, really, the whole idea of ascension is not, limited to the yogic view of the Kundalini. I mean, the whole ascension, the notion of ascension in the Christian mystical tradition has a very similar idea. Um,
Yeah.
and even the crucifixion of the cross, Christ on the cross on the top of the Calvaria of the hill, is a kind of ascension. And so, but really, I guess I took more of a view that the life force, it's called the anima, in the Jungian tradition, that anima, that deep life force, it moves everywhere. It not only moves upward, but moves downwards, moves sidewards, moves inwards, moves outwards, moves backward in time, forward in time. It's no longer really time bound, of course.
Hmm.
It's certainly not bound by our tissues. meaning, the limits of our, our hamstrings and and our trapezius. It's not bound by our body. And so really the nature of the chitta, the nature of consciousness, of course, is boundless. And that's espoused in most all, I think, of the meditative traditions of India, China, Japan, and Tibet. It's really that it's boundless. And so then it's not simply about moving upward. In
Yeah.
fact, a lot of my practices is there's a lot of dropping, there's a lot of sinking, there's a lot of dropping, and that's a good antidote to what I call the sort of in the French coffee press, when you've got all those swirls.
Yeah.
It just like all the flakes of prana just swirling up there. It's really great to do the French coffee press of sinking up and settling, so your morning brew is clear.
I love a clear morning brew. Maybe I was going to ask you about this in later, but I feel like maybe it's an appropriate time because, the ascension we're talking about, it's not just about ascension, but that ascending maybe sometimes gets attached to a kind of traditional view of the spiritual path as sort of an up and out, transcending the body, moving to higher states of consciousness that are sort of, above this sort of brute, ignorant physical field, or at least that's, how it's couched sometimes. And, in a talk that I listened to of yours, you mention how oftentimes there is a confusion between the experience of a mature spiritual insight, or sort of the maturation of sadhana, as you actually put it, and the kind of dissociative experiences that might be induced by trauma. So do you see this sometimes problematic relationship between trauma-induced disassociation and this kind of, this kind of traditional or simplistic idea of ascending out of the body?
Sure. I mean, I think it's really common that people get confused. I mean, the yoga high is, palpable. I mean, I've self sedate, done a lot of self sedation where I use the practice to really just kind of mute my dreams and mellow myself right out, and it feels, really super floaty, and that feels good. There's maybe a time for all of us where we identify with the practice that way, but I think that well, for one, that can be kind of a trap. That itself can be a cul-de-sac, and can take students 10, 15 years to sometimes get out of that cul-de-sac of the sort of yoga high. And so really, of course, the experience of upward rising, energy, which is really kind of called udana vayu in the subtle body, the five winds. One of them goes upward, and the whole idea of udayana mula bandha is to kind of move the energy upward. It does. It can get confused with disassociative states of awareness. And I think all in the course of a day, we blip out. Each of us has our own little strategies for blipasana, just a quick checkout. And maybe we get skillful and we only check out for 3.5 seconds, but more times than not, we're checking out for longer periods of time. We're not present anymore for what's arising, and really disassociative states where the body protects itself from an overwhelming threat. Literally, people go out of their body. So really, the whole idea in the somatic training is to become more embodied, is to be in the ground, in the dirt, in the in the gut of our tissues, and I kind of think the word transcendental, I like that word, because trans means across. So
Mhm.
it's transatlantic. Then you're going from from London to New York, or, and so trans means kind of horizontal, like, so it's not simply a vertical ascension, but it's really how can we move, how can our awareness expand in all directions, and maybe that's really more the feminine,
Mm.
versus sort of the masculine, the phallic, the whole notion of the linga and the upward rising consciousness. Of course, it's tied in historically in Hatha Yoga to, that a lot of that impulse, but the horizontal. So if transcendental is a kind of horizontal experience of unity or integration, or the transpersonal experience, then yeah, maybe it's not so much,
Yeah.
right up into the up the rafters into the top of the head. So especially not quickly. I'm really
Mhm.
not of the school to move the energy up quickly. I have lots of caution around that.
I don't want to criticize any particular tradition, but is that what often Kundalini experiencers are doing? Is it I haven't taken much Kundalini yoga, but it feels like it's sort of built around that kind of quick ascending kind of energy cultivation.
Hmm. Sure. I think it is, in classical hatha yoga, there's that idea of, just, taking the speedway, right up through the spine. And, but these texts were put together long before, the era of the screen and
Yeah.
the kinds of anxieties we face daily, even in Shanti Little Santa Fe. I find myself, starting to swoon with all of the various tasks that I have to attend to, and so what I practice is I practice really getting into my bones. So if I'm riding the subway, or I'm in a car, or I'm just in a conversation, and I start to feel like I start to kind of go up and out, which sometimes I identify as the airbag asana, where to protect ourselves, we kind of blow out, you know, and it feels kind of good because it feels like there's space, but that space doesn't have the clarity that the Tibetans talk about when we in the meditative training. We're talking about the clear light of bliss, or the clear space. So what I do, instead of doing like airbag asana, is like I get down into my bones. It's more of a downward movement.
Yeah.
Settle. And that's really helpful for me, especially people who are kind of airborne anyway. And I have
Hmm.
a fair amount of vata. I have a fair amount of air in me. And people have air in them. They like to use it because it kind of feels like whoosh, like, here I go. I'm flying through my day, and I'm doing 100.
Flying yogi. Yeah.
Yeah, the flying yogi, and I'm high on caffeine, and I'm meeting my friends, and everything's happening. But there's something about really getting down, 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 and then staying in the root, really. So the sky becomes the root, sky becomes the ground, ground becomes the root.
Yeah, yeah, that's really beautiful, and it sort of uh, resonates with something that you had mentioned that you write about in your book at the very beginning, which I loved, was the first shape that you mentioned, first practice is Shavasana, which you had mentioned in the book that you also do often at the beginning of your classes, which, as we know, is oftentimes a pose that's done at the end of class. And I really loved that because it really was a practice of dropping in, of connecting with the floor at your back. And and so I guess, and you sort of touched a little bit on this in terms of our kind of culture of speed. And and so I'm wondering, obviously anybody that knows you knows that you're a fan of slowing down.
Mm.
But can you offer, some reflections on this culture of speed and why slow practices are so necessary? I mean, we're already sort of talking about it, but I guess I'm also so interested in sort of maybe reflections on how the body and the nervous system is becoming sort of hijacked by this activity.
Good word. Yeah, hijacked. Really, yeah. I mean, I think as a culture, we do it collectively. There's this collective urgency towards, doing and going through your to-do list in a day, knocking off as many things as you can, sending out as many messages, getting as many friends as possible. This sort of, this sort of like shrapnel style, this sort of put myself out into the world, and so really,
Shrapnel, that's a good way of looking at it. Just kind of makes it very violent almost.
it is, even if there's a good intention with that, it steals from the spirit. It corrodes, the subtle body really. So gathering practices are so valuable, whether you're on the land, just directly sitting underneath a ponderosa, or underneath the big oak tree, or or gathering practices that really, collect our prana and bring it inward, are so valuable. And so yes, speed gets trapped in the tissues. Speed gets trapped in the diaphragm, gets trapped in the stomach, intestine, affects digestive rhythms, affects neurological rhythms, affects sleep patterns. And so, the practice is really an antidote to the speed body. So
Yeah.
that's why I deem, Shavasana as the most important pose.
Mm-hmm.
And the Shava, is really a gateway to the subtle body. That is, it's a gateway to Pratyahara. It's a gateway to Yoga Nidra, the yogic sleep,
Mm-hmm.
which is ironically not about sleep at all, but about wakefulness. And it's a gateway to the meditative states of yoga. So I oftentimes begin in Shavasana, and there's that inward gathering. And so, yeah, I'm always really mindful of my own, when I have this accumulative speed that builds up, and that I can't kind of, I can't get off the mill, I can't get off of the speed cycle, that over time, and it tends to kind of pinwheel, of course, like when you get stuck in speed, you get stuck in that program, you can't get out of it, pinwheels. And it might even feel good. It feel like a pinwheelasana feels good because you're moving. So something must be happening. But we need to wean ourselves off. I think collectively, this is perhaps so hard. Even to say it seems antithetical to our entire forward momentum of our planet. But if we can wean ourselves a bit off of that speed, that's why 20 minutes a day, 45 minutes a day in shamatha, or in, chitta nirodha, where there's just stillness, and that's really healing.
Mm. Yeah, I mean, I think any yoga teacher who's committed to the subtler practices is trying to kind of, you know, offer or invite students to, engage with meditation, because it seems that people are much more comfortable moving their body dynamically than they are sitting with their eyes closed, or even with their eyes open for 20 minutes at a time. For anybody that's sort of, seeking to cultivate a meditation practice, there's so many myths about meditation. So maybe you want to touch on those myths and offer some suggestions or insights into how someone might begin to cultivate a sitting practice.
Mm. Well, I think it's really great to get up in the morning, take your pee, and go right to your cushion,
Yeah.
and and avoid opening your screen. So once you've opened your screen, you've had it.
Mm-hmm.
You're done for. You're you're already kind of hoovered into all of the, all the people in your life, all things, all the phenomena of the outer world. And so that's a precious time. It's a liminal time between, between night and day. It's that transition between dream and sleep. And of course, it's called the loaming hour, and the
Mm.
in the old British poets. And so that's the time for communion. And if you give that away, you're kind of selling your soul in a way. And we all sell our soul. I mean, I know yogis, I have colleagues, they sell their soul to the marketplace.
Yeah.
And
The fame machine.
Totally. And
Hmm.
I'm aware of that myself, given just, the little bit of notoriety and
Yeah.
what I have. It's like, you have to really carefully, it's like protecting a child, really. You have to protect call it the soul, call it the anima, call it the Buddha nature, or call it just your own, heart space. Is you have to carefully protect that, and then you have to nourish it. And so that's why that's so important, that window of time. So if you're beginning, it might be 5 minutes. You set your little cricket chimer, or your little windows, or your little Om Shanti clock, and do your little ding ding, and then just do 5 minutes. And then the next day, you build up and you do 10, and then sooner or later you're like, oh my God, I'm at the 5 minute mark and I can't leave this right now.
Hmm.
This communion is something it's calling me. It's really calling me to stay here. And if you don't feel the call, then it'll be kind of rote. It'll be just like, oh yeah, I'm doing 5 minutes because mindfulness movement is so big now, and everybody says it's good for me, and then you have your Kellogg's Special K, and you're reading it on the back of the cereal box how good mindfulness is, and until you get to the point where there's that inner calling, and Rilke, he talked about that as that inner voice. And then once you hear that, then you start listening. That's very powerful. And then you're like, wow, 20 minutes will just can feel like 3 minutes. And so you can't teach, at least I can't teach exactly how to listen to that voice. You
Hmm.
can't really teach another to do that. You can just, leave some little breadcrumbs along the trail, for them to, maybe to follow.
Meaning like they have to be inspired to move in the direction of that relationship. Is that kind of the idea?
I
And
think,
you can't cultivate that inspiration, yourself, or
I think
as a
so.
teacher, I mean, sorry.
Yeah, yeah. It can't really be taught. It's like
Hmm.
some people will go through this entire life, and they'll never have a time and place of inner communion. And there's nothing wrong with that. They're in the world of material, and they're worried about their checkbook, and they're worried about, their car payment, and, getting their kids off to school, and paying for college, etc. And that's the world we live in. But those of us who are interested in this, healing the fundamental split, back to where we started, and this idea of yoking and being in relationship, which is kind of really what it is. It's like being in relationship with that you know I don't know the words you would like, the soul, of that inner voice, or that the child within. Is like, then it takes time, and it takes support from others, good teachers, a good therapist, a really kind friend to help support us there. And there's 108 reasons why we get pulled out of that inner relationship to attend to the world around us.
Yeah.
Some people in this lifetime, they never touch it. But those of us who do touch it, that's when we start listening. And then, and that listening, it kind of brings us closer and closer and closer, in.
Yeah. So when we're moving inward to begin to cultivate that relationship with that inner voice or the anima, as you're saying, um, What is the role of emptiness in that? Because, you know, you mentioned, obviously you have a long or have had much experience in the Buddhist tradition, and you're, I think you would, do you consider yourself a Zen practitioner?
I do, yeah.
Okay, so Zen tradition has had a, you know, powerful impact on your teaching and on your approach to these topics. And emptiness is a word that you use a lot, and I know this is a very popular Buddhist term, and shunyata, and we see this, you know, across the Eastern traditions. But, you know, sometimes it's kind of resisted. I feel like, in my, at least in conversations that I've had, because it gets sort of contrasted with fullness, and, you know, fullness seems more like a better term or a better sort of goal or, of practice. So, how should we understand the role of emptiness in the practice of moving inward?
Mm. Well, language, of course, is tricky. It's hard to
Yeah.
navigate. It's a little bit like the giant slalom competitors starting up in South Korea here in the Winter Olympics. Like, it's hard to navigate this slope, and yet, really, I think the whole idea of emptiness is the open-heartedness and the open-mindedness.
Mm.
Ah, what's arising now? So if I'm sitting here on a Tuesday morning and, I'm really worried about my day, that's what's arising right now. Or I'm thinking about, my father who's in his last lap around the track, who's going through the dying process now. I'm thinking of him, and or I'm just feeling my breath, or I am remembering when I was in third grade on the playground, and so whatever's arising, that's where we are, and so then we really are in the nowness. So the emptiness is basically a portal
Mm.
into the nowness, and then
Mm.
the nowness, the immediacy of the now is where it's at. And then the immediacy of the now has to have a quality of intimacy, not like lovey-dovey intimacy, although it could be that, but really just that sense of full presence, like, I feel my breath, I feel my fear, I feel my trepidation, I feel the longing. So then it's like the intimacy, the immediacy brings us into the now. And then there's space for that to occur. And so I think the emptiness of the form business, that really just brings us into, the arising of where I am today. And it's hard to land there.
Yeah.
It's hard to have the discipline, really, to the staying power to stay there. And I think people kind of forget these days that yoga involves discipline.
Yeah.
It's almost kind of a rare commodity. you know and that discipline in the subtle body is the capacity to remain with the now, the ever-changing now, with
Mm.
with an open heart and an open mind.
Yeah. I like that you said, that you remarked how intimacy isn't always a kind of lovey-dovey or, you know, cuddly experience. And then what you're saying regarding discipline, because it seems that, just as you say, you know, people are seeking out yoga as this sort of something that's going to automatically make them feel better, and so they're chasing this experience of the now on condition that it, you know, provides a feeling of satisfaction of some kind. So do you have any remarks on that, on just on what we're saying on being intimate with what perhaps, you know, from a certain vantage point is unpleasant, and then how does that contribute to this process of awakening, or however we want to think about it, this process of hearing the inner voice?
Mm. I think many of us use yoga as a sedative.
Yeah.
I'd be surprised if there were people who got really into this practice at some point along their path were not using it to sedate themselves. And so there's nothing wrong with that. But Jung Carl Jung was cautious about doing a lot of tapas because its sedative effect, because
Mm-hmm.
he wanted to really look at his dreams and understand the architecture of the soul journey, meaning, all the all the shadows and the light that are held inside. And so when we basically stop, using yoga to kind of, whack ourselves over the head and sedate ourselves, basically that's kind of like power yoga, which I did for
Yeah.
15, 18 years.
You
Um,
did?
oh
I
yeah,
didn't know that.
in the Ashtanga Vinyasa.
Oh, yeah.
Sure. Ashtanga Vinyasa, very powerful tapas. Where really after practice, it was like, oh, I was so sore, I could hardly walk. And, it was just blitzed out, like for hours, where I have to take a nap in the afternoon. I was just so hammered, So then really when we're not using it as a sedative, then, then the intention is to be with different states of feeling and awareness, and being with states of difficulty, or as you suggest, the unpleasant, basically the painful or the bittersweet is really valuable. I think at some point, I'm not sure anybody can really evolve in this path without this. At some point, we have to be able to really be with our pain,
Mm-hmm.
the pain body. And I'm not just saying, pain in the lower back, the pain in my shoulder, the really the heart pain. And that's when our practice starts to really mature, when we're like, okay, this too, like, oh, it's painful to see my child, slip through my fingers and go out into the world, and he never speaks to me on the phone anymore, and I'm losing him, and the pain of a relationship that's falling apart, or the pain of, of realizing that my body is kind of falling apart. And so then when we can allow for that sorrow, it really deepens the heart chakra.
Mm.
So many yogis, they're drawn to the idea of the shanti, or the sedative, or the sweetness, the kind of bliss body. But within the body of bliss is the body of sorrow.
Mm.
And of course, the Christ consciousness, the whole thing about the suffering, the suffering, of course, is an integral part of joy. There's not joy without the suffering part.
Wow. Yeah, I love the way you put that. Within the body of bliss is the body of sorrow. I think that's such a beautiful way to put it. And yeah, it sort of reminds me of something someone else said once, that Ananda is not this kind of, like roller coaster bliss. If bliss is a if roller coasters are blissful for people, I guess they would be scary for other people. But this idea that, Ananda, when it is actualized or realized, is sort of this bliss that persists even within the context of quote unquote pleasant and unpleasant, painful and joyful on the surface of life experiences. So that's I like that sort of couched with this idea that within the body of bliss is the body of sorrow. That's really beautiful. So what is, I just want to ask this question because I don't think I've asked this question on the podcast before, and I think Zen Koan, is that how you pronounce it? Koan, not Cone.
Koan.
Koan. I just think they're so cool. Can you talk a little bit about what a Zen Koan is, and maybe give an example or two?
Basically, a Zen koan is a portal. It's a doorway or a portal into working with the psychic interior, particularly the part of our psyche that craves.
Mm.
And of course, really, we could say the primary aim of yoga at some point is working with craving mind. And the Buddha taught that really, that of all the poisons or all the obstacles to, enlightenment or progression on the path, that craving kind of lies at sort of at the base of it all. And so when we start doing koan work, inevitably we're trying to get it. We're trying to like figure it out. There's a part of our psyche that's trying to grasp it. And then, inevitably in the koan work, it's not possible to grasp.
Yeah.
Like the koan, what's the sound of one hand? Some people say it's the sound of one hand clapping, but I think traditionally it's just the sound of one hand. So, what's the sound of one hand? And so then you can't like suss that out. You can't say, oh, I figured this out. It's just not possible. And of course, when we're talking about the space of the, Satchitananda, or, the Tibetans call it, like the unconditional awareness, or the naked awareness, or the pure awareness, however you describe that, it's not accessible through the interpretive lens at all. You can't figure it out. You can't, it's outside of construction
Yeah.
altogether. So the koans are constructed to kind of deconstruct the mind's capacity to even get. And that in of itself is a good 10-year project to realize, oh my God, I really can't get this. And some people, have moments of just powerful heart openings, or they have really powerful moments where I think they realize this. But for many of us, it's a journey to really say, wow, I can't grasp this, and I'm really at peace with that. I'm really okay with that. And there's a letting go of part of the psychic, the kind of fabric of the psychic interior. There's a breakthrough of that, and that opens us up to, really starts opening us up to everything.
Mm. Mm. Yeah, I mean, I love what you're saying, because it's sort of a reminder of that this process isn't about getting it, as you're saying. It's about gripping hold of some kind of, conceptual substance that will finally redeem us. It isn't about, arriving at the right answer. And I love it because it's sort of a practice of approaching the non-conceptual that so much of the tradition is talking about. We hear of, the Purusha is beyond concepts, and Brahman, the Atman, is beyond concepts. There's no categories that can capture it. And so this is really, the Zen koan seems to be this practice of moving in that direction, rather than just sort of describing it with, philosophy or whatnot, this mode or domain of the non-conceptual.
Mm.
So T.S., this has been a lovely conversation, and I want to move now to might be the last topic that we'll cover, or maybe one of the last ones, which is, how yoga connects to death. And you offered 2 talks that I found on your SoundCloud, where you're talking about the Katha Upanishad and the deity of death, Yama. And so I just wanted to maybe invite you to reflect on how yoga connects to death, or how you see yoga as being a science of death.
Yeah, well, of course, we could say that, the sister science of yoga is Ayurveda.
Mm-hmm.
Ayur, of course, means life, and Veda is the study of, or in that case, the prolonging of longevity, the prolonging of life. And so, if Ayurveda is the study of life, then yoga is really the science of death, and Shavasana, of course, being the, in a sense, the ultimate pose, and really, of course, it's so hard to let go. I mean, yoga is all about letting go. It's all about letting go, and the question is, can we let go before we let go? Can we let go before we die? And that's very, very difficult, because my father is in his dying phase right now. He's in the last really few weeks or months. We don't know of his life, and it's a powerful thing to witness death firsthand.
Yeah.
And so when we're able to, in a sense, kind of course, let go. There's this sense of uh, uh, really, in a sense, it's that letting go of all that we think who we should be, who we think we should be, and also our identifications of who we are. So really, in the dying process, the Tibetans, of course, so they celebrate this as the birth, and that's why the parinirvana, or the great death, it's really kind of like a becoming, and so I just think for each of us, day to day, we kind of, it's a preparatory work to let go. In the last 20 years of life, 10 years or 5 years, can we prepare ourselves? Can we ready ourselves for the great letting go? And so that's of course non-clinging. Another way of describing non-clinging. And so in so many ways we cling to our ideas, we cling to people, we cling to ideas, we cling to what we own, we cling to who we think we are. And so there's a great shedding, there's a real great shedding that goes on layer by layer, back to the subtle body, layer by layer, and a psychic shedding. And so it's not that if you shed before you finally, slough off your body, if you're able to kind of shed all those, the neuroses and the obsessiveness and compulsiveness, and then we kind of already are boundless. We are already kind of in an open space. So we could say that yoga is really a preparation for dying, in a really positive way, in a really powerful way.
Do you think that some of the modes of doing yoga that we're seeing are, in terms of the asana practice that is the most in vogue, is maybe perhaps a kind of clinging to the body, clinging to flexibility, clinging to the appearance of certain postures, and do you think this is a form of maybe not a form of yoga that is attuned to what you're talking about?
I think so. I think many do yoga as a self-improvement project.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's a big industry, There, people spend thousands of dollars on self-improvement, and that all is good. I've worked that way many, many years in my own path. And then there's a point at which we kind of arrive at another door, another gate, and this is more subtle body, or more sophisticated in a way, is like, okay, now it's not about improving myself. It's beginning to kind of shed who I think I am, or who I think I should be.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's, oh, I need to be this amazing male yogi, or, oh, I need to be enlightened, or, oh, I need to be, I need to be this, or I need to be that. And so when we start shedding, that's when we start really feeling free. And we didn't realize how we've been in the grip or the snare of these identifications for many, many years. And so, well, yeah, it's about self, we want to keep our bodies healthy and mindfulness to keep our spirit open. But then there's a place at which then we start letting go. Mm-hmm. And don't wait too late, don't wait until you're on the last lap around the track, because it takes a long time. We're talking a good 10, 20-year project to do the shedding. So, there's beautiful little Zen koan, cicada shell, little did I know it was my life. Cicada shell, little did I know it was my life. And we realize that we kind of have this shell, this outer thing that we carry around with us. It's kind of like our protective armoring, and it's kind of like our identity, even if it's a yoga identity. And then you're like, wow, what's it like to drop the cicada shell? You know, and when we drop the cicada shell, then there's this metamorphosis. There's something else that emerges, and that's wow. That's a beautiful thing.
Mm. So I thought it was interesting that you also said, letting go of, attachments to certain expressions or certain appearances of the body, letting go of certain ideas we have about ourselves. You also said letting go of the need to be enlightened. So I thought that was sort of interesting. And so in what way do you see sort of ideas about enlightenment being a part of this kind of cicada shell?
Even the mention of enlightenment is possibly a huge, sand trap that that people get stuck in, and then we have all kinds of ideas about what it is,
Yeah.
what it should look like, or who
Who has it?
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
And so there's all kinds of projections that we make around that, and then there's a point at which, wow, if you read the Diamond Sutra, one of the great Mahayana texts, along with the Heart Sutra, in the wisdom development in the Buddhist training, the Buddha is very clear that it's that I'm not enlightened. That it's not, that is that there's no mark, there's nothing there that says this is it. But our minds are always wanting to grasp onto that. And if we could grasp it, then we'd build a website around it, and we sell it for $99.99 a month. But we're talking about something that's inconceivable, that's totally beyond grasp, and that's boundless in that sense. And then what are we left with? Well, oftentimes we're left with our grasping mind and our projections about, what enlightenment should be or would look like. And then eventually, we always kind of feel less than. So if you're on the sitting cushion, and those of us who practice this regularly, we're like, oh, I'm not there. How can this be enlightenment? Because I got a pain in my shoulder, or I'm getting distracted, by my chatter, and then, oh no, this isn't it. So then we're back in the dual. We're back in the fundamental split again. So it's good to let go of ideas at all together about what enlightenment might be.
Yeah. Wow. Well, a lot of food for thought here. It's been such a pleasure talking to you, T.S. Is there anything any closing, thoughts that you have based on what we've been talking about, or anything else you want to bring up?
I think last thing is just sleep really deeply.
Good advice. I need to remember to do that all the time.
Yeah, sleep, one of the greatest medicines, and that heals the subtle body, and then replicate positions or moments in your life that are like sleep, and start to kind of find that liminal space between waking and sleeping, and spend as much time there as possible.
Yeah, that's great advice. What a great everybody go take a nap. So T.S., is there anything you want to share in terms of what you're doing, or do you have any workshops or trainings coming up that you want to share with our audience, or ways people can connect with you?
Sure. Well, of course, I'm based here in Santa Fe, New Mexico, where I've lived for 30 years. And my wife and I built a retreat center 15 minutes outside of the downtown area. And really, this year, I have lots of events that really focus all around the subtle body, and particularly silent retreats. We do silent retreats here on our property where there's lots of meditation and yoga combined. And then one of my favorite courses is the one where people learn how to do a home practice. It's called
Mm,
Art of Self-Practice, where people learn really, or just ingrain inside of themselves, oh, I can do home practice. And that's one of your closest, will become one of your closest friends, is having a self-practice that you do every day.
absolutely.
Yeah.
Wonderful. And when is that taking place, the art of self-practice?
That's in May of this year.
Okay. And you're teaching that out of Santa Fe?
Yes. Yeah.
Excellent.
Yeah.
All right. Well, it's been such a pleasure chatting with you, T.S., and I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day.
Mm. Thank you, Jacob. Be well.